Your laptop just died in the middle of an important task. What do? No power, no display, no clue what's wrong. Is it the battery, the hard drive, the motherboard? As an IT support technician, you will be the one with the answers. Learn how to replace keyboards, hard drives, RAM, even motherboards step by step. Want to go from clueless to confident with any laptop repair? Stick around. Your future as a certified IT support technician starts now. Imagine a situation where you're rushing to finish a document on your laptop when suddenly it's drama. A BSOD, blue screen of death, suddenly appears. This is what we call the famous blue screen, or in its literary translation, the blue screen of death. And the good news is that you haven't even saved your work. Panicked, you press the power button on the laptop, the lights turn off, but don't turn back on. You are then wondering, what is the problem? Is it a power problem, a hardware problem, or software? As a computer technician, you need to be able to assemble and disassemble the components of a PC so you know where to look in case of a breakdown. In this course, we will learn how to install and configure components of a laptop, the equipment of the support technician. Replacing laptop components isn't as simple as a desktop PC. That's why the best way to disassemble is to follow the manufacturer's official documentation. To disassemble a laptop, you will need to use a Torx screwdriver. Screwdriver Torx M-Bout T8. This type of screwdriver is very easy to find on Amazon by searching for the keyword precision screwdriver. For example, with this box, you are sure to have the right bit for any equipment. So let's see how to replace the different components of the laptop. In your new job as a computer technician, you will have to replace the keyboard of a laptop. It is possible that one or more keys no longer work very well, which causes a lack of productivity. As soon as you start dismantling a part of a laptop, you should always start by removing the battery, and of course, disconnecting it completely from any electrical source. There are a few ways to disassemble a keyboard. Ideally, you should do a little internet research to identify them according to the model. The fact of using the internet allows you to go much faster than reading hundreds of pages of the official manufacturer. On some laptops, everything happens in front. That is, you need to identify the clips, which allow you to unclip the keyboard from the PC. And on others, you have to find on the back of the PC the screw that allows you to detach the keyboard. Usually, there is a small keyboard icon to identify it. When pulling on the keyboard to remove it from its support, you will have to be very careful not to pull too hard, as it is connected with a very thin cable. You will need delicacy to detach this small connector from the board. After carefully removing the keyboard from its stand, if you see that the PC's motherboard is dirty, you can take the opportunity to give it a little blowgun or clean it with a small brush, designed especially for this purpose. Above all, don't blow with your own mouth on it. You could send them viruses. And finally, all you have to do is reconnect the new keyboard and reassemble all the components. Hard drive replacement. Now let's move on to replacing the hard drive. Hard drives are components where data is stored. Depending on the type of hard drive you use, it may last longer or shorter, which may require you to replace it. If the disk is not completely HS and it just shows signs of weakness, you should back up the data and then put it back on the new disk. Before starting, you must of course remove the battery from the laptop and check that it is unplugged from the power source. Then, to be able to access the hard drive, you have to unscrew the back panel of the laptop or remove the complete case. After unscrewing the screws that hold the hard drive, you just need to unplug it from these connectors. So be careful, because if the new hard drive is new, and therefore it doesn't contain an operating system, well, it won't be able to boot. On the other hand, if the new hard drive already has an operating system installed, then it will automatically boot into that system. Before we move on to replacing another component, we'll quickly talk about the different types of hard drives. Here's what a magnetic hard drive looks like. Even though this type of hard drive has been replaced by SSDs or hybrid drives, it is still possible to see it on some laptops. Now, here's what an SSD solid-state drive looks like. This type of disk fails less than a magnetic disk and is much faster. The added advantage of the SSD is that it doesn't make any noise, because there are no mechanics inside. That's also why it very rarely breaks down. On the other hand, they are much more expensive than a magnetic hard drive. And there is also a mix between the two, which is called hybrid hard drive. Here, the storage features a mix of spinning disks and non-volatile solid-state memory. The main purpose of having an SSD in a mechanical hard drive is to act as a cache for the data stored there. This greatly improves performance because it keeps copies of the most frequently used data. Now let's look at the different dimensions of hard drives. A 3.5 disk is rather reserved for desktop PCs, while a 2.5 disk is for laptops. To see the difference, here is a representation of a 3.5 and 2.5 disk. 2.5-inch magnetic disks typically rotate between 5,400 and 7,200 RPMs, while 3.5-inch disks can reach 10,000 RPMs. On the other hand, a 3.5-inch drive consumes twice as much power as a 2.5-inch drive, which is a big advantage for laptops, 2.5W instead of 5W. As for the 1.8-inch disk, well, they're even smaller. Memory replacement. Now, let's move on to memory replacement. The process is identical to the hard drive because generally, the memory sticks are very close to the hard drive. On some laptops, it is possible to have a compartment reserved only for RAM memory. This gives the advantage of not having to disassemble the entire rear cover to replace them. To remove a memory module, you must push on small hooks, tilt it at an angle of 45 degrees, and then we can extract it from its location, replacing the optical drive. Now we're going to talk about replacing the optical drive, which is much simpler than changing a hard drive or memory. To do this, it is usually enough to unscrew a simple screw on the back of the laptop, to then slide it out and out of the case. Wireless card replacement. Let's move on to built-in wireless cards, which are small Wi-Fi or Bluetooth devices. Here, depending on the model of the PC, the procedure can be more or less difficult. Sometimes these small devices are right next to the memory, and in other configurations, you have to remove the motherboard of the laptop to be able to access them. Again, the ideal is to look directly at the supplier's documentation or to do a quick search on the internet with the reference of your laptop. Replacing the video card. Now, let's move on to the graphics card replacement. For this step, it is important to check that it is supported by the laptop and the operating system. Of course, you must also follow the manufacturer's instructions because there are several ways to do it. In a laptop, you have two types of processor chips: the CPU, which is and the GPU, which is the video chip. After identifying the GPU, you will have to disassemble the fan with its heatsink to access the chip. When you do this kind of manipulation, you always have to make sure to add thermal paste between the GPU processor and the fan. Screen replacement. Let's move on to replacing a laptop screen, which is one of the most difficult tasks. That's why many people prefer to buy a new laptop rather than go for screen replacement. It's not impossible, but it requires removing and handling many parts, which can damage the PC even more. At first, you will have to eclipse the outline of the screen delicately until you remove the plastic cover that surrounds it. And be careful, because as with keyboards, the screen is held in place by a small, very fragile cable, which you will have to disconnect gently. DC plug replacement. We will now talk about the replacement of a DC socket. The DC domain controller socket is the plug that is used to connect the power cable to the laptop. For this point, you will most likely need to perform welding, because this socket is usually built into the motherboard. That is to say, it is directly welded to it. Touchpad replacement. Let's move on to the touchpad. Again, don't hesitate to ask your Google friend to follow the procedure according to the model of the PC. Generally, you have to remove the battery and unscrew the back cover of the laptop to be able to access the plate that protects the touchpad. Plastics and covers. We will now quickly talk about the different pieces of plastic and covers that you can find when you start dismantling a laptop. These small items are usually used to hold something in place. They are not there to look pretty or to fill in the gaps. These parts are therefore very fragile, which is why they must be handled with caution. For example, I'm referring to the different plastic covers that are used to hold the PC shell. It's a bit like an IKEA wardrobe, which you assemble and disassemble several times. Well, there will always be breakage. It is also important not to get angry when, for example, it doesn't want to come out properly. If this happens to you, it is advisable to take a break and understand what is blocking. Speaker replacement. Now, let's talk about replacing the speakers. After removing the battery and unscrewing the back cover of the PC, you will be able to locate the speakers very easily. Next, you need to look for the small connector that connects each of the speakers to unplug it carefully. All you have to do is extract it from its location to replace it. CPU replacement. Now, let's move on to the processor. The CPU. If it is not integrated into the motherboard, then you can replace it, because otherwise, you'll have to change the complete motherboard. As with the video card's processor, you will need to locate the CPU and remove the heatsink and fan first to be able to access it. And before putting the heatsink and fan back in, don't forget to add a little thermal paste to prevent the CPU from overheating too much. Replacing the motherboard? And to finish the course, we're going to talk about replacing the motherboard. You guessed it, it's quite tricky, because in order to be able to extract the motherboard from a laptop, well, you have to remove everything we saw in the lesson. For this delicate maneuver, you have to be very careful when pulling on the cables to remove them, because they can tear or break easily.